One day, Edward was in the shed where he lived with the other engines. They were all bigger than Edward and boasted about it. "The driver won't choose you again," said Gordon. "He wants strong engines like us." But the driver and fireman felt sorry for Edward. "Would you like to come out today?" "Oh, yes, please," said Edward. So they lit his fire, made lots of steam, and Edward puffed away. The other engines were very cross at being left behind. Edward worked hard all day. The coaches thought he was very kind, and the driver was very pleased. "I'm going out again tomorrow," Edward told the other engines that night. "What do you think of that?" But he didn't hear what they thought, for he was so tired and happy that he fell asleep at once. Next morning, Edward woke up to find nothing had changed. Gordon was still boasting. "You watch me, little Edward, as I rush through with the express. That will be a splendid sight for you. Goodbye, little Edward. Look out for me this afternoon." Edward went off to do some shunting. He liked shunting. It was fun playing with freight cars. He would come up quietly and give them a push. Then he would stop, and the silly freight cars would go bump into each other. "Oh!" they cried. "Whatever is happening?" Edward played till there were no more freight cars. Then he stopped to rest. Presently, he heard a whistle. Gordon was cross. Instead of nice shining coaches, he was pulling a dirty freight train. "A freight train, a freight train, a freight train," he grumbled. "The shame of it, the shame of it, oh, the shame of it." Edward laughed and went to find some more freight cars. Then there was trouble. "Gordon can't get up the hill," the porter called to Edward's driver. "Will you take Edward and push him, please?" They found Gordon halfway up and very cross. His driver and fireman were talking to him severely. "You're not trying." "I can't do it," said Gordon. "The noisy freight cars hold an engine back so." Edward's driver came up. "We've come to push." "No use at all," said Gordon. "You wait and see," replied Edward's driver. They brought the train back to the bottom of the hill. "I'm ready," said Edward. "No good," grumbled Gordon. They pulled and pushed as hard as they could. "I can't do it! I can't do it! I can't do it!" puffed Gordon. "I will do it! I will do it! I will do it!" puffed Edward. Edward pushed and puffed and puffed and pushed as hard as ever he could. And almost before he realized it, Gordon found himself at the top of the hill. "I've done it! I've done it! I've done it!" he said proudly. He forgot all about kind Edward and didn't say thank you. Edward was left out of breath and far behind, but he was happy because he had been so helpful. At the next station, he found that the driver and fireman were very pleased with him. The fireman gave him a nice long drink, and the driver said, "I'll get out my paint tomorrow and give you a beautiful coat of blue with red stripes. Then you'll be the smartest engine in the shed." Edward was getting old. His bearings were worn, and he clanked as he puffed along. He was taking empty cattle cars to a market town. The sun shone, birds sang. But Edward was heading for trouble. Come on, he puffed. Oh, oh, screamed the cars. Edward puffed and clanked. The cars rattled and screamed. Some cows were grazing nearby. They were not used to trains. The noise and smoke disturbed them. As Edward clanked by, they broke through the fence and ran across the line. A coupling was broken and some cars were left behind. Edward felt a jerk, but didn't take much notice. He was used to cattle cars. Bother those cars, he thought. Why can't they come quietly? He was at the next station before either he or his driver realized what had happened. When Gordon and Henry heard about the accident, they laughed and boasted. Fancy allowing cows to break your train. They wouldn't dare do that to us. We'd show them. Old Toby was cross. You couldn't help it, Edward. They've never met cows. I have, and I know the trouble they are. Some days later, Gordon rushed through Edward's station. Boop, boop. Mind the cows. Hurry, hurry, puffed Gordon. Don't make such a fuss. Don't make such a fuss, grumbled his coaches. A long stretch of line lay ahead. In the distance was a bridge. It seemed to Gordon that there was something on the bridge. His driver thought so too. Whoa, Gordon, he said and shut off steam. Whew, said Gordon. It's only a cow. Shoo! Shoo! He moved slowly onto the bridge, but the cow wouldn't shoo. She had lost her calf and felt lonely. Bleh, she said sadly. Everyone tried to send her away, but she wouldn't go. Henry arrived. What's this? A cow? I'll soon settle her. Be off! Be off! Bleh. Henry backed away nervously. I don't want to hurt her. At the next station, Henry's conductor told them about the cow and warned the signalman that the line was blocked. That must be Bluebell, said the porter. Her calf is here, looking for her mother. Percy will take her along. At the bridge, Bluebell was very pleased to see her calf again, and the porter led them away. Not a word. Keep it secret, whispered Gordon and Henry to each other. They felt rather silly, but the story soon spread. Well, 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 chuckled Edward. Two big engines afraid of a cow. Afraid? Rubbish, said Gordon. We didn't want the poor thing to hurt herself by running up against us. We stopped so as not to excite her. You see what I mean, my dear Edward? Yes, Gordon, said Edward. Gordon felt somehow that Edward saw only too well. One day, James had to wait at the station till Edward and his train came in. This made him cross. Late again! Edward laughed and James fumed away. After James had finished his work, he went back to the yard and puffed onto the turntable. He was still feeling very bad-tempered. Edward is impossible, he grumbled to the others. He clanks about like a lot of old iron, and he is so slow, he makes us wait. Thomas and Percy were indignant. Old iron? Slow? Why, Edward could beat you in a race any day. Really, said James. I should like to see him do it. Next morning, James's driver was suddenly taken ill. He could hardly stand, so the fireman uncoupled James ready for shunting. James was impatient. Suddenly, the signalman shouted. There was James puffing away down the line. All traffic halted, called the signalman. Then he told the fireman what had happened. Two boys were on James's footplate fiddling with the controls. Phew! They tumbled off and ran when James started. The signalman answered the telephone. Yes? He's here. Right. I'll tell him. The inspector's coming at once. He wants a shunter's pole and a coil of wire rope. What for? Wondered the fireman. Search me, but you'd better get them quickly. The fireman was ready when Edward arrived. The inspector saw the pole and the rope. Good man, jump in. We'll catch him, puffed Edward. James was laughing. What a lark, what a lark, he chuckled to himself. Suddenly, he was going faster and faster. He realized that he had no driver. What shall I do? I can't stop. Help! Help! We're coming, called Edward. Edward was panting up behind with every ounce of steam he had. At last, he caught up with James. Steady, Edward, called his driver. The inspector stood on Edward's front, holding a noose of rope in the crook of the shunter's pole. He was trying to slip it over James's buffer. The engines swayed and lurched. At last, got him, he shouted. He pulled the noose tight. Gently braking, Edward's driver checked the engine speed, and James's fireman scrambled across and took control. So, the old iron caught you after all, chuckled Edward. I'm sorry, whispered James. Thank you for saving me. You were splendid, Edward. That's all right, replied Edward. The engines arrived at the station side by side. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting. A fine piece of work, he said. James, you can rest and then take your train. I'm proud of you, Edward. You shall go to the works and have your worn parts mended. Oh, thank you, sir, said Edward. It'll be lovely not to clank. Sir Topham Hatt sat in his office listening to the noise outside. The passengers were angry. The station master came in. "There's trouble in the shed, sir. Henry is sulking. There's no train, and the passengers are saying this is a bad railway." "Indeed," said Sir Topham Hatt, "we cannot allow that." He found Gordon, James, and Henry looking very cross. "Come along, Henry. It's time your train was ready." "Henry's not going," said Gordon. "We won't shunt like little tank engines. That was Thomas's job. We're important tender engines. You fetch our coaches and we will pull them. Tender engines don't shunt." "We'll see about that," said Sir Topham Hatt. "No engine on my railway is too important for small jobs." And he hurried away to find Edward. The yard has never been the same since Thomas left to run his branch line, he thought sadly. Edward was shunting. "Leave those freight cars, please, Edward," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I want you to push coaches for me in the yard." "Thank you, sir. That will be a nice change." "That's a good engine. Off you go, then." So Edward found coaches for the 3 engines, and that day the trains ran as usual. But next morning, Edward looked unhappy. Gordon came clanking past, hissing rudely. "Bless me," said Sir Topham Hatt. "What a noise!" "They all hiss me, sir," answered Edward. "They say tender engines don't shunt, and last night they said I have gray wheels. I haven't, have I, sir?" "No, Edward, you have nice blue ones, and I'm proud of you. Tender engines do shunt, but all the same, we do need another tank engine here." He went to a workshop, and they showed him all sorts of engines. At last he saw a smart little green engine with 4 wheels. "That's the one," he thought. "If I choose you, will you work hard?" "Oh, sir. Yes, sir." "That's a good engine. I'll call you Percy." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." And Sir Topham Hatt brought Percy back to the yard. "Edward," he called, "here's Percy. Will you show him everything?" Percy soon learned what he had to do, and they had a happy afternoon. Then Henry came by, hissing as usual. "Wheesh!" went Percy. Henry jumped and ran back to the shed. "How beautifully you wheeshed him," laughed Edward. "I can't wheesh like that." "Oh," said Percy, "that's nothing. You should hear them in the workshop. You have to wheesh loudly to make yourself heard." Next morning, Thomas arrived. "Sir Topham Hatt sent for me. I expect he wants help," he said to Edward. "Shh, shh, here he comes," replied Edward. "Well done, Thomas. You've been quick. Listen, Henry, Gordon, and James are sulking. They say they won't shunt like little tank engines. So I have shut them up, and I want you both to run the line for a while." "Little tank engines indeed," snorted Thomas. "We'll show them." "And Percy will help too." "Oh, sir. Yes, sir. Please, sir," answered Percy. Edward and Thomas worked the main line, greeting each other as they passed by. Percy puffed along the branch line. Thomas was anxious about Annie and Clarabelle, but both driver and conductor promised to take care of them. There were fewer trains, but the passengers didn't mind. They knew the 3 other engines were having a lesson. Gordon, James, and Henry were cold, lonely, and miserable. They wished now they hadn't been so silly. Trevor the traction engine is old-fashioned, but he doesn't care. He knows that he is really useful, like his friend Edward, the blue engine. Early one morning, Trevor was chuffing about the vicarage orchard. He had important news for Edward.
The vicar says that not all children are able to have holidays by the sea, so he's having a garden party to raise money for a seaside trip. I'm going to be the star attraction, chatted Trevor, giving rides to all the visitors. The vicar is putting up posters all about it.
I'd like to help too, sighed Edward, but without my rails, I wouldn't be much good at a garden party. It was a beautiful day, but Edward was worried. I wish there was something I could do for the party, he said. I'd like to be helpful, like Trevor. Edward's driver laughed. You're helpful in your own way, and that's on the railway. Next day, it was Trevor's turn to look disappointed. He had bad news.
The vicar's been so busy that he forgot to put up the posters. Now no one will know about the party.
But Edward had an idea. Don't worry, he said. Everything is going to be all right. Then he explained to his driver. The vicar can paste his posters on my cab and coaches, so wherever I go, they'll go too. Well done, Edward, said his driver. I'm sure Sir Topham Hatt will agree. As indeed he did. Edward steamed happily through the stations collecting his passengers. Look, they said, the vicar is holding a party. We must go to that. Later, Trevor was resting in the orchard shed when Bertie rolled by.
Hello, Trevor. Why are you dozing there like an old stick in the mud? I'm not dozing. I'm resting, replied Trevor.
Then he told Bertie about the vicar's party. I'll be there too, boasted Bertie. I'm not sure people will want to ride on an old traction engine after traveling in a smart red bus like me. The party day arrived. It had rained heavily during the night, and the orchard ground was soaked.
Rain and mud won't spoil my day, said Trevor.
No, indeed, agreed his driver. We'll stay on the road, then we won't get bogged down. Trevor was soon busy trundling up and down the quiet country lane, carrying lots of laughing children. He was just turning a corner when he heard Bertie.
Hello, old-timer. I'm taking everyone to the party. People have come from all over the island.
Trevor gave Bertie a cheerful whistle and turned back toward the orchard. Then there was trouble. Help, I'm stuck, shouted Bertie. His wheels had sunk deep in the orchard mud. Terence the tractor arrived just in time. I'm the one who has to plow fields, laughed Terence. We'd better get you out of here. Using strong ropes, Terence and Trevor pulled Bertie clear of the mud.
This will teach Bertie a thing or two,
Trevor chuffered to himself. At last, Bertie was on the road again. Thank you, Trevor. You're not a stick in the mud at all.
No,
smiled Trevor.
But you were, just for a little while.
That evening, the vicar arrived to see Edward and his driver. Thanks to your good idea about the posters, hundreds of people paid to come to the party. We've raised lots of money for the children. Edward was very pleased, and Trevor fell happily asleep thinking of all the children who would now get to the seaside at last. Sir Topham Hatt works his engines hard, but they are very proud when he calls them really useful.
I'm going to the scrapyard today,
Edward called to Thomas.
What, already?
You're not that old, replied Thomas cheekily. Thomas was only teasing. The scrapyard is full of rusty old parts and machinery. They're broken into pieces, loaded into cars, and Edward pulls them to the steelworks where they are melted down and used again. Today, there was a surprise waiting for Edward in the yard. It was a traction engine.
Hello, said Edward. You're not broken and rusty. What are you doing here? I'm Trevor. They're going to break me up next week.
What a shame, said Edward.
My driver says I only need some paint, polish, and oil to be as good as new, but my owner says I'm old-fashioned.
Edward snorted.
People say I'm old-fashioned, but I don't care. Sir Topham Hatt says I'm a useful engine. What work did you do? My owner would send us from farm to farm. We threshed corn, hauled logs, and did lots of other work. The children loved to see us.
Trevor shut his eyes, remembering.
Oh, yes, I like children.
Edward set off for the station. Broken up, what a shame. Broken up, what a shame. I must help Trevor, I must. He thought of all his friends who liked engines, but strangely, none of them would have room for a traction engine at home. It's a shame, he hissed. Then, beep, beep. Why didn't I think of him before? There on the platform was the very person.
Hello, Edward. You look upset. What's the matter, Charlie?
He asked the driver. There's a traction engine in the scrapyard, Vicar. He'll be broken up next week. Jem Cole says he never drove a better engine.
Do save him, sir. He saws wood and gives children rides. We'll see,
replied the vicar. Jem Cole came on Saturday.
The Reverend is coming to see you, Trevor. Maybe he'll buy you. Do you think he will?
Asked Trevor.
He will when I've lit your fire and cleaned you up.
The vicar and his two boys arrived that evening. Trevor hadn't felt so happy for months. He chuffered about the yard.
Show your paces, Trevor,
said the vicar. Later, he came out of the office smiling.
I've got him cheap, Jem, cheap. Do you hear that, Trevor? Cried Jem. The Reverend saved you, and you'll live at the vicarage now.
Beep, beep, whistled Trevor. Now Trevor's home is in the vicarage orchard, and he sees Edward every day. His paint is spotless, and his brass shines like gold. Trevor likes his work, but his happiest day is the church fair. With a wooden seat bolted to his bunker, he chuffers round the orchard, giving rides to children. Long afterward, you'll see him shut his eyes, remembering.
I like children,
he whispers happily. Bertie the bus was giving some visitors a tour of the island of Soda. It was their last afternoon, and Edward was preparing to take them to meet Bill and Ben. He found it hard to start the heavy train.
Did you see him straining?
Asked Henry.
Positively painful,
Remarked James.
Just pathetic.
Grunted Gordon.
He should give up and be preserved before it's too late.
Shut up, burst out Duck. You're all jealous. Edward's better than any of you.
You're right, Duck, said Boko. Edward's old, but he'll surprise us all.
I've done it. We're off. I've done it. We're off, said Edward as he finally puffed out of the station. Bill and Ben were delighted to see the visitors. They loved being photographed. Later, they took the party to the China Clay Works in a brake van special. Everyone had a splendid time, and the visitors were most impressed. Then Edward took the visitors home. On the way, the weather changed. Wind and rain buffeted Edward. His sanding gear failed, and his fireman rode in front, dropping sand on the rails by hand. Suddenly, Edward's wheels slipped fiercely, and with a shrieking crack, something broke. The crew inspected the damage. Repairs took some time.
One of your crank pins broke, Edward, said his driver. We've taken your side rods off. Now you're like an old-fashioned engine. Can you get these people home? They must start back tonight.
I'll try, sir, promised Edward. Edward puffed and pulled his hardest, but his wheels kept slipping and he could not start the heavy train. The passengers were anxious. The driver, fireman, and conductor went along the train, making adjustments between the coaches.
We've loosened the couplings, Edward. Now you can pick up your coaches one by one, just as you do with freight cars.
That'll be much easier, said Edward. Come on, he puffed and moved cautiously forward. The first coach moving helped to start the second, and the second helped the third.
I've done it! I've done it! Puffed Edward.
Steady, boy, warned his driver.
Well done, boy! You've got them! You've got them!
And he listened happily to Edward's steady beat as he forged slowly but surely ahead. At last, battered, weary, but unbeaten, Edward steamed in. Henry was waiting for the visitors with the special train. Beep, beep. Sir Topham Hatt angrily pointed to the clock, but excited passengers cheered and thanked Edward, his driver, and fireman. Duck and Boko saw to it that Edward was left in peace. Gordon and James remained respectfully silent.